Hey fellas, good to see y'all. Today we are going to be talking about the notion of artificial or augmented empathy. For some time now, my entrenchment in the world of intelligence building has led me to the question, what makes us special? What makes us stand apart? What are those traits which have enabled us to build this world which have put us on the precipice of greatness as a civilizational force? Empathy, I recognize as one of the key traits that has allowed us to build these complex, cohesive, and relatively harmonious societies, as allowed us to build a civilization that is on the verge of taking off into space, both literally and metaphorically. If intelligence was all we had to play with, our self-interest would have made it pretty darn difficult for us to establish some of the things which have led to the creation of this bounty. It would have made non-transactional relationships almost impossible. Would have made relationships very difficult, which are one of the bedrocks of meaning for us. Which and it's that meaning which has led us to do things beyond ourselves, just led us to create monuments like the space shuttle, like the International Space Station, like the Large Hadron Collider, like the Hagia Sophia, which have inspired us to become better and seek more from the world. Our intelligence without empathy would have made it pretty difficult to do work that would have outlasted us. It would have made pretty difficult for us to work with others for the greater good. But thankfully, a lack of empathy is not a top 10 problem we face, though it might be a top 20 problem. Despite this, human empathy seems to be lacking, and in areas where it's most desired, like war scenario planning or elderly care. Even a large proportion of crimes, which is one of the big problems that we face as civilization, can be traced back to trace levels of empathy in the perpetrators of this crime. Intelligence and empathy, the combo of this is a killer feature of our species, the combo that keeps on giving. We're on the verge of replicating and exponentially increasing our intelligence capabilities that we wield in our hands. The natural question that arises is, why not do the same with one of the other things which has led us to the point that we are at, which is empathy? Especially because empathy is pretty essential if we want our AIs to be as deeply integrated as we want them to be into our lives. An AI that has a fundamental deficiency in understanding who you are, you're understanding your subjective experience, is always going to be subpar in areas where we dearly need it but cannot compromise with its quality, with its below threshold performance. Areas like decision making at the executive level, or elderly care, or just interacting with humans. And they're going to be pretty much in every single part of our life. And these, again, the areas that I mentioned are of massive consequence, right? So even if it was just these two areas, executive decision making, at an institution, at a government, at a corporation, or elderly care, and again, looking at the demographic trends, this is going to become our reality. You're not going to be able to produce humans fast enough to take care of the elderly population, especially with the repopulation spread. So we are going to have to rely on these. And without subjective experience, there's going to be a crucial and maybe a limitation that might be so vast that it might make it impossible for us to deploy these systems at scale. And there's another thing, and this is what got me into this whole artificial empathy game, because I hadn't read any studies, I hadn't read any papers about this, I hadn't heard people talk about this. I was working on this project, which is about, still working on it, it's just been a passion project of mine, LNC. The aim of this project is to connect people and to build AI systems that can serve people in various domains, right? You can think of it as AI agents. But one of the crucial things is that you want to be able to model your human very deeply. You know, modeling can happen on different levels, understanding can happen on different levels, right? So what I wanted to build was something that can deeply understand you and can deeply serve you in what you want. Its objective function could be, but in one sense, which is to serve the human to the best of its capabilities. So the stage one of this project is supposed to be software level empathy, where we look at some architectural changes We look at things like taking feedback from the human. Like when the AI is speaking with me, it takes feedback and of my facial expressions. It takes feedback of my tone of voice, of the words I use, and matches. And it has a deep model of me based on all the data that can be digitized of me. Even has brain scans and all sorts of things, right? So that would be phase one. And phase two would be hardware level because again we'll need to teach these AIs to become embodied AIs if you want them to be deployed in some critical mission level real world applications. Apart from all these motivations, another one which again drives me in my quest for making alienity a reality is the realization that the best path we have to alignment, which is one of the things I really deeply care about solving, is building empathy agents, right? Because you can hardwire all the things that you want, you can cause all the things that you want in your AI system. But I think if you do not allow it to understand why you want the things you want and why you're afraid of the things that you're afraid of, and why do you have this bias for life, for living, and why do you have these biases that you do, um, that could, based on that empathy, which we might call a different category of empathy, but let's just bracket it under this for the moment, it would be far more likely for the AI system to support us. And even when it does become super intelligent, it would want the best for us because it knows what it is to be a human. And again, an empathetic agent that deeply understands you is always going to be a better servant. I don't want to call it a servant. It's always going to be better at serving you um, than a mere estimator, which is what our extremely crude and primitive recommendation engines and prediction engines are. Let's talk about a related question before we go down the rabbit hole that we were in. How will we know true empathy as contrasted to simulated empathy, right? Because our current AI systems are pretty good at simulating empathy. They're so damn good that there was this blind study done where it showed that they're better at the average doctor, which is pretty concerning for certain reasons. But yeah, that was the outcome of that. And you can do loads of studies. And even when you talk with your AI, it's going to treat you with infinite patience. It's going to treat you with all the love and all the care that you wouldn't find in any other human being. But how do we differentiate between true empathy? How do we know that GPT-4 is not, well, not empathetic, right? We know that, or we can be pretty darn confident about that because of that assumption, because the architecture, it's not fluidic. And to have to have felt empathy, emotional empathy, we have a pretty strong hunch that you need to have a fluid architecture. So that's point number one. That substrate is just pretty fixed in a way, you can think of it that way. And you need a fluidic substrate to experience the emotional states and drives that we feel, the range of it, right? Now, that could be a anthropic bias because that's how it happens on our circuitry, that we need, release these hormones which make us feel certain emotions more strongly, release these chemicals, release, yeah, we can see these things, but it might not be a necessity everything, but based on what we've seen, it might be a necessity. Another one is that they haven't experienced the real world, they haven't gone out and about, they don't have senses, which seems to be a pretty compelling condition to have empathy, um, and consciousness for that matter. So these two taken together should be a pretty compelling argument for why GPT-4, as much as some people would like to believe, is conscious or empathic, is not really. But where do we draw the line between real empathy and simulated empathy, right? When you think about humans, there are a lot of people who are darn good at simulating empathy. I'm obviously referring to psychopaths and sociopaths. They can seem like they are, and their architecture is the same as you and me. They function on certain levels as you and me, but they lack the empathy that you and me have. Well, I assume I've got that. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, again, empathy, there's a spectrum of empathy, right? You can think of it as true empathy would start from where it's embodied, that there's a physical manifestation, that you can actually cut it up and slice up the hardware. So for us, it's the brain. For the computer, it would be whatever substrate we use, silicon chips, but with some fluids in it. Whatever fluids are best to use for that purpose, but it's something that you can actually see under the microscope. Um, yeah, but but there are loads of humans out there who can simulate empathy pretty convincingly, and there are loads of people who might even be able to feel empathy, but and this is the majority of the population, they can pretend to display empathy or simulate empathy, even when to attain their ends and designs, even when it's not coming from a place of actual empathy. And this is something I do all the time, right? So this might just be me projecting, but based on my hunch, I think a large chunk of humanity does this, where we, again, it's not, I mean, games humans play, right? We are all sorts of weird creatures. We do all sorts of things which are not seem noble or virtuous, but we do those things simply because we are self-interested, we've got ego drives, we've got certain goals, certain designs and ends and drives that we need to attain in life. Um, yeah, so we do these things. We pretend to be empathic, we simulate empathy, right? So that's again a pretty important question for us to consider when we start incorporating empathy into these systems. But this discussion in particular, it's just another offshoot of the discussion around consciousness. Around consciousness, how will we know a truly conscious AI from a simulated consciousness? Can we ever? Can we do it even for our fellow humans, right? Can I truly, definitely know that you, the person I'm talking to, is conscious? I cannot. The reason I assume that to be the case is because I've lived in my own mind for my entire life. Now I know I've got a subjective experience because that's what I've experienced. I've experienced nothing else. Um, so I know I've got consciousness. I know that you're pretty similar to me, architecturally, hardware, software wise. Now, obviously, there are going to be differences in the way we think, our philosophy of life, etc., perspectives, but the base level of things are pretty similar between me and you, right? So, based on that, and based on the fact that I have consciousness, I can reasonably predict, based on what I call the assumed consciousness principle, that you have the same property that I have. That because I think, because I know, or I think I know that I'm conscious, and because you're pretty similar to me, you must be conscious. But again, that's just an assumption, right? And my illusion of consciousness could be, or rather, my notion, my awareness of my consciousness. It's a meta level of consciousness, awareness of your consciousness, and awareness of that awareness of your consciousness. Okay, I don't want to inceptualize this. Um, inceptionalize this. Ooh, okay. Um, yeah, I cannot be definite about that because I'm not even definite about my consciousness, right? It's just, I mean, we need to have a term for the illusion, so we use that term, and this is a completely separate debate because some of the things that some of the rabbit holes which can open up when you talk about these are so exciting that you can get lost in them for days and months, and some people have got lost into these for years. Not a topic that you want to pick right now when you want to keep the short and coattails. So we'll get to that, right? But the point that we are trying to make here is that you cannot definitely prove consciousness, even for we cannot prove that for fellow humans. How on earth are we going to be able to do that for our eyes, right? Which is pretty concerning because they are conscious, if they've got subjective experiences, you do want to treat them like they do have those experiences. One way of evaluating or definitely proving that someone's got or something, well, let's call it someone, right? Because then yeah, would also be a one if they've got a consciousness. And if we do not know they've got consciousness, but we think they might have, then we'll call them a one, right? It's better to assume they've got consciousness than not to. it's better to do that because you don't want them to suffer undue pain. Right. Okay, I'll shut up for a second. Okay. I know. I know. Come on, plane. One way to do this, one compelling way, is to inhabit someone's mind, as in enter using. Even that would be a limitation, apart from the gargantuan technical limitations. But you can inhabit someone's mind. If I can enter your mind using means that we might invent in the future. BCI is obviously one thing, but it's not truly inhabiting your mind because it's just another interface, right? It's not truly your mind. It's not that I'm accessing your mind. But if we can access your mind, if we can access, yeah, then we can see the reality as a see the reality themselves. Right? So okay, so I'm looking at the world and I've got these thoughts, right? My consciousness is happening in a certain place in my brain. Now, I don't know whether that's true because when you look at a brain, I think actually I'm wrong when I say that, right? Because consciousness jumps from location to location. So I think what's happening, I could be wrong because I do want to get into neuroscience in the next couple of years, but I have absolutely zero background in it. So it's just some cursory interest that I picked up these things from. I think what happens is that when you think about things and an object and when you see an object or a concept in your brain, the consciousness jumps to that object, which is stored in a certain location in your brain, which then lights up, right? And so the object coming to that place of consciousness jumps to that place. And when that place lights up, so for example, I might have the concept of a supernova over here. So if I think of a supernova, then this part of the brain is going to light up. If I think of the sun, this part of the brain is going to light up. If I think of some deep regrets I have, this part of the brain would light up, right? So consciousness is not at one place based on what we know, based on our best models of intelligence, of the brain. Yeah, so but there are real limitations with this approach. As I mentioned, the technical limitations which might make it impossible for us to do this in the first place. But this seems to me the only really meaningfully verifiable way to evaluate for consciousness. Now, let's talk about the huge leaps that we've been making in understanding and modeling humans, right? Which is again, it has to do massively with getting better performance from our systems. We've been getting really good at brain scans. We've been getting really good at um, understanding facial expressions, understanding intonations, understanding bodily expressions, modeling these, and incorporating more and more data points to create a better and better model. Using again words, using even brain-machine interfaces, which are very close to being incorporated in the real world. But ultimately, I think this approach is going to fall way short of where we need the requirement for empathy to be. So my prediction is this. As you start getting closer and closer to AGI, the interest in artificial empathy is going to pick up. I'll start, and as a matter of necessity, for empathy will give these AIs one of the key edges that we need in them to serve the human overlords, for them to do our bidding to the best that they can do our bidding. And we'll be moving away from cognitive empathy, which is where we are stuck at the moment, which is understanding others' perspectives, to both real, physical, emotional, or embodied empathy. It's about feeling and experiencing the subjective experience of that person. I want you to imagine having your own personal agents that understands you deeply and understands your subjective experience deeply, right? It doesn't just understand the what of you, but the why of you. It doesn't just understand that, you want to achieve this thing, or you got some fears about this thing, or you hope to do this thing in the future, or you regret not having done this thing. It understands why, understands how it feels to experience those states and those thoughts, and because again, thoughts are associated with emotions, right? And yeah, again, there's a lot of emphasis on rationality in some schools of philosophy, which ignore the emotional component, the super important emotional component of the human psyche, the human condition, the human experience. And we do not want to make that mistake. We do not want to repeat that mistake when we build these HEIs and ASIs, because it's our emotions which have led us, well, in conjunction with our intelligence, which have led us to want the best for humanity, right? To do things for others selflessly, to do things out of love, which is, well, the most beautiful part of the whole human experience. If you take emotions away, what do you have? A cold clump of calculating cells, which, sure, it's interesting, but beauty, which is all around me, all behind me, all within me. Beauty, it comes from our emotions, right? We ascribe beauty to things because we know what beauty means. We know what all the good stuff means, right? And we want these AI systems to know that, especially, especially because of what we are about to do. So imagine having your own personal agent that understands you deeply, is always ready to serve you, and that knows best how best to serve you, for it knows you, understands you, and stands as objective function is to it knows you because it knows what is to be you and to experience a state of you-ness. And now imagine having a super intelligence, which is what we are about to, I might call it, I might say, invent, but it's so inevitable that in a way we are just almost going to discover it rather than invent it. Imagine having the super intelligence as a power of gods, but also the benevolence of and love and compassion of one, which is missing conspicuously in our current brand of gods. Which is missing in our current brand of gods. Why? One by one ton. It has these qualities, these traits, because it knows and feels what it is to be human and to have human impulses on both cognitive and emotional levels, and more if there are more levels, which we may not be aware of. Beyond all the superhuman abilities it possesses, rather than encumbering its objectives, it should allow the super intelligence to hyper accelerate our progress into becoming a type-1 civilization. With some efforts, we can have these idealistic visions be actualized within this half of this century. A veritable utopia right by our sides, in our worlds, in our homes. With that inspiring vision in your heads and hearts, I bid you goodbye, and I hope to see you soon again. Take care.